Welcome to Eternal Journey, the podcast.
What is up, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of Eternal Journey, the podcast that talks about all things eternal with a focus on limited play. I'm your host, Jedi, also known as Caesar the Crowd Pleaser, and this week on episode 26, we're going to be talking about playing around combat tricks. And these are tricks specific to the current format, which is Dark Frontier. So, last couple episodes, we kind of veered off a little bit, went a little more general and level up episodes. This week, we're going to go ahead and go more specific back into the current format. Hope you guys enjoy it. But first things first, I want to go ahead and mention our YouTube and Twitter. That's right, that is EJthePodcast on YouTube, where you guys can find not only this podcast, the video version of it, but other content such as drafts, sealed run-throughs, tournament run-throughs, some brewing, all that good stuff, and events, breakdowns, and card evaluations. So definitely check that out at EJthePodcast. And follow us on Twitter, once again, EJthePodcast, so you stay up to date on when content is posted, when we are going live, as well as the occasional What's the Pick and Keep or Redraw. Speaking of going live, you can catch me streaming every Sunday, Monday, Tuesday at twitch.tv/Jedi_EJ. I primarily focus on doing limited play like drafts and stuff. But come hang out, let me know what you think of this week's episode, as well as what else is going on in your life on Eternal. Love to have you. Alright guys, want to go ahead and take a moment to do that new segment, which is the shout out, where we call out subscribers to our Twitch channel, as well as some other people that I think are of note. So first off, a little bit of general shout outing. I want to shout outing, I'm sure that's the thing, I just turned into a verb. I want to give Moneybags and Kasendrith a shout out. Both of those guys are fellow limited streamers of Eternal. You guys can check them out in the mornings. They both stream in the mornings. That's how they're able to raid me. They both decided, out of the many people they could have, to throw a host my way, which led to some great followers as well as awesome interactions and stuff like that. So definitely give them a follow. They are fantastic people. Moneybags and Kasendrith, they're great streamers. I enjoy their streams quite a bit. You can learn very much so. Both are top ranked drafters. You can easily find them on the top 10 list. If they are any lower than that, it's probably because they're trying meme decks or just drafting for entertainment value on their channels. Next up is the Misplay Podcast. These guys are great as well. They are actually kind enough to message me on my first Reddit post and gave me a shout out there, as well as just giving me a little bit of advice and checking out the YouTube channel. So I wanted to give those guys a shout out as well. They put on some pretty great content, quite a bit of humor in there, but they do take the fact that we are human and make mistakes in this game in a leisure position. I like them. You guys should listen to them. They are part of my Eternal content consumption. Give those guys a check out as well. And finally, our subscribers. These are two actually, because one was kind enough to refer their friend, which later gave me a subscription as well to the channel. This is tFeek and GeeBrum. That's right. They are friends that tFeek started following me first. I believe they found me on YouTube and began to watch me occasionally on Twitch, and then referred me to GeeBrum, who later just recently joined Eternal Journey. So I wanted to give both of you a shout out. tFeek, GeeBrum, you guys rock. Thank you so much for the support. I really appreciate it. It means a lot to me. I hope you get a warm and fuzzy on this shout out, because it is meant to. But alright guys, that is everything. So once again, Moneybags, Kasendrith, the Misplay Podcast, tFeek, and GeeBrum, you guys are awesome. Thank you so much for all the support. And yeah, you guys rock. I look forward to hanging out with you again. So guys, that leads us to our pack one, pick one for the episode. This week's pack is a bit of a doozy in the fact that we have a couple of cards in similar colors that could be picked one or the other. So if you're seeing this on YouTube, then you guys can tell already our rare is just not a thing. It is Death Pit. This is the relic at rare for obviously 3 time for all units. All units have charge. Yeah, that's just plain old not a thing. We're definitely not going to play a card that takes away some of our power for our opponent then to have first swing at us. So that's not there. The other uncommons, we have Patience. Increase the cost of each card in the enemy hand by 1. Yeah, that's not a thing. And Huru Insignia. And then finally, Headhunter, which is the 2/1 Gunslinger Minotaur for 1 and a green. Pay 2 and twist Headhunter to play a wanted poster on an enemy unit. I like this card quite a bit. I'm probably a little higher on it than other people are, mainly because of the fact that I like it. It can be a very aggressive card as a 1 or 2 drop, and then later in the game when you draw it, you can simply just twist it to place a wanted poster on one of your opponent's units and potentially getting your cards back. If you have any chance of buffing it with a coin or a weapon and you're able to place 2 or wanted posters on something, I think you are definitely going to end up getting your card's value off of it. You have the choice of going 2 wanted posters on 1 unit or a wanted poster on 2 separate units, depending if you think you're going to kill them with blocking or something of the sort. So yeah, I like Headhunter. As far as the commons go, we have Guns A-Blazing and Belligerent Yeti and Blink, which are all not in contention. Cards that we are looking at is Horn of Plenty. Your units have +1/+1 relic for 5 at a time. Torrid Test Pilot, which is the 1/4 Minotaur Valkyrie for 4 and a green, has flying, and you can twist it for 2 to gain 1 armor. Tremor Shocker, the 6/6 Worm for 6 time, and shift 4. Angry Prophet, the 1/2 Cultist at 2 and a shadow, and +1 attack for each of your other units. And finally, Crooked Alley Guide, which is the 3/3 for 3 and a shadow rogue. Summon, scout, and you could shift 1, so you can play this on turn 1. So this pack is actually a little interesting. Reason being is it has some phenomenal cards to kind of lead into several colors. I think I do like Prophet in a Stone Scar kind of go wide strategy, but Alley Guide obviously takes the case. Alley Guide recently was, or not recently anymore, but was buffed from a 3/2 to a 3/3. The card is absolutely phenomenal. You could play it on turn 1, you can play it on turn 3, you can play it on turn 9, and the scout, the scout is very relevant. So I think when it comes to Shadow, Crooked Alley Guide is the one that's going to take that, and it being just a single Shadow influence means it's easier to play. Headhunter and Test Pilot are similar as well, where you are never disappointed to draw a Test Pilot. They both only cost 1 green influence, so they're easily playable, and they have benefits across the board. So those are 2 picks as well that might lead us into Justice, which is one of the strongest colors in the format. And then finally, Horn of Plenty and Tremor Shocker. Tremor Shocker being a pretty decent all-around unit. A 6/6 on turn 4 is fine, especially when it comes out emerged. So, well, I apologize, guys. So it can come out a swinging and get in for 6. That could definitely change combat math. But Horn of Plenty is just a solid pick. So I think between all these, it would be between Crooked Alley Guide being the stronger shadow card, Horn of Plenty being the stronger time card, and Torrid Test Pilot being the more versatile and stronger Justice card, because it doesn't require anything else to happen for it to be good. And out of these 3, I think it's very interesting, but they each kind of fit a different role, actually, because Crooked Alley Guide is very good in the early game. You can play it on 1 or you can play it on 3 based on what your board state is and what you need. Test Pilot is a great mid-range or development, mid-game or development card, and then obviously your top end with Horn of Plenty. So it's kind of what you want to fill up in your curve. I typically try not to fill up the early part of the late part of my curve too early, because those cards are typically interchangeable, since you're only really looking to have somewhere between 2 to 4 of these. So I believe actually in the real draft, I took Horn of Plenty just to change it up. I think we were drafting a lot of Justice, but I think in a vacuum, I would actually take a Test Pilot. Test Pilot is good on defense, it's good on offense, and it has some synergies with the armor, and it's just a good all-around unit versus Horn of Plenty can typically, I mean, it's easily slashable and goes in a lot of decks, but sometimes it just doesn't do enough. And then Alley Guide is a great card as well, but I feel like the ceiling on it is just a little bit lower than Test Pilot. So the overall more powerful card for me would be Test Pilot, and that's the one I'm taking. Let me know in the comments below or on Twitch when we stream live what you would pick out of this one, or let me know on Twitter. I will be posting on Twitter. I'd love to see and hear your feedback on it. But yeah, that's it for me, guys. That is the Pack 1 Pick 1. Let's go into our main topic. Actually, I take that back. We're actually not going to do the main topic just yet. I am actually going to kind of talk a little bit about some stuff that came in last episode, which was talking about tilt. A couple of things came to mind that I wanted to take a moment and bring to y'all's attention because I feel like it would help deal with tilt and is just part of being in the competitive scene of any kind of card game. One thing that I've always kept in mind when playing against other people in any kind of competitive thing, and I believe it was Marshall Sutcliffe that said this from the Limited Resources podcast, or at least it was the first time I heard it, where you are not always the hero in your story, right? And what this means is we often view our tournaments and our games from our perspective, right? Where we are our own hero. But so we're the good guy. We want to win. We're supposed to win. You know, we deserve to win. But the flip side to that is that if you're looking at it from your opponent's point of view, then you're not the hero. You're actually the bad guy or the end boss or the obstacle for their good guy victory. And when you see it that way, you kind of are able to understand that you're not always going to win, or things aren't always going to work out for you. So I'm going to give you a couple of personal stories to kind of show you the two sides of the coin. And I feel like it would go a long way towards creating a better play experience for yourself as well as when you play with other people, which I do want to touch that being tilted and being angry and being salty, though it is fine to do, I don't want to say it's not, it is fine to do. There is a correct and incorrect way to handle it because it can create a bad or negative player experience for the other player, which isn't as dominant or predominant on a digital card game because you don't really see your opponent, but all of us have experienced that where we're playing a game against someone and then all of a sudden they just rope every single turn when they know they're dead, to kind of tilt a little bit and kind of get that last jab at you. And it can potentially lead to a bad experience. Obviously in face-to-face games where all my stories are going to come from, it's a lot more impactful or a lot more influential. The negative aspect of it, both for you and anyone watching and the other player. So first off, I want to mention two sides of a top deck, right? So think about when you're talking with your friends about a bad beat, or you're streaming and people are tuning into your chat, right? If you are, for example, or let's take your opponent's at 3 life, right? And you're just sitting there like, okay, I just need to survive till I top deck the Streets of Flame, right? Or the Torch. When you top deck, let's say Streets of Flames because this is a limited podcast. When you top deck the Streets of Flame and you're able to burn your opponent out and win the game, then chat is cheering for you. You're like, yeah, we got there. That's what's up. Well played, this and that. And it's a positive experience, right? The flip side to that is, let's say that you're beating down your opponent and you both stabilized, and then now you're on the beat down and you're trying to get them, and you stabilized at 3, but you're starting to take them down, and you're slowly wearing the resources down. You're sitting at 3 for like 3 turns, and then maybe the turn before you kill them, they top deck the Streets of Flame and they kill you. And now the exact same scenario ends up becoming a bad beat story where it's like, oh man, they just had to get lucky and top deck the right card to kill us. And so the exact same play just on opposite sides of the battlefield can create a negative or positive response. And when you identify that, hey, you were that person X amount of games ago and it felt good, then you can kind of understand, like, all right, like, hey, sometimes it happens, sometimes we get there, and sometimes we don't, and sometimes our opponent gets there. A good example of that is trying not to tilt when your opponent just draws everything that lines up correctly with your deck. It happens. It's limited. Sometimes they have the answer to a 1-drop, your 2-drop, your 3-drop, your 4-drop, and they just end up steamrolling you. Like, it literally happens, and that's fine. It's nothing you can do about it. It's just a variance of the game. So that's just kind of the general one. So here are the couple of small stories I have to include for you guys that will show you that there's two sides to every coin and why it's important not to let yourself tilt, because you aren't necessarily the hero, right? So first up, I have when I took a break from Magic, I came back, I started to play in FNMs, and it was during, for those of you that were around, I believe it was in a Strahd time frame, because Innistrad / Mirrodin Besieged, because I feel like I was playing blue-white humans using the Mirrodin Crusader, and Hero Bladehold and Geist of St. Traff deck with the Angelic Renewal, Angelic Blessing. Turns a unit into a Serra Angel. And I was having fairly good success with the deck. And one of the few early, like maybe the second or third FNM I came up to, I was playing an opponent and he just got ridiculously salty, like extremely sour, being super passive aggressive, but like openly just being in a bad mood, tapping aggressively, complaining about my cards. And it just, luckily I was old enough where it didn't bother me and I still ended up taking down the match. But even if I lost, I would have probably made it even worse, because then I'm like, great, I lost to a horrible player, like a rude player, not horrible. And so even though I won and was able to move on and, win some packs or whatnot, like I still felt I had a bad experience about the game and I wasn't able to enjoy it because of that. And so like there's where I understand they were tilting because they didn't want to lose to this deck, etc., etc. And maybe it wasn't the deck or me specifically, it was just in general, but it still impacted my gameplay and not my gameplay, but my feeling of the game. And that's the last thing you want, is to pull people away from Eternal because of having a bad player experience. Next up was when I made the top 8 of a PTQ, which is the Magic version of an ECQ. And I came in on the 8th seed, so I ended up playing against the 1 seed. And it was a mirror match. We were both playing red-green ramp, so a Rakano ramp style deck, having Genesis Hydra and Atarka, which is the card that's over my shoulder over here. You guys can see that. Atarka, Dragonlord Atarka, the big one. So I would like to think Magic's version of Razan. And we went to a game 3. And it was close. They ended up doing a Genesis Hydra for a good portion, a third of their deck. And I think they had 5 outs, and they ended up whiffing. So they drew somewhere around 12 to 16 cards and didn't see one of their 5 outs. And I ended up going and taking down game 3. And, for me, it was great. Hey, I did it. I'm moving on to the next round. This is awesome. But the flip side to that is for them, they came in, and that was actually his first top 8, if I remember correctly. He was super excited. He was running good because he was in the first seat. He was really having fun with the deck. His girlfriend was there. And I got to admit, he took it with grace. Like, he wasn't bitter or sour or anything, but you could tell that he was extremely saddened and disappointed. Maybe it was because it was in front of his girlfriend, maybe because it was his first top 8. And so, to me, it was great. It was a positive thing. But on their side of the coin, like, I was the bad guy and I beat them and I knocked them out of top 8 when they felt like they had a really good chance of taking it down. And so think about that when you feel like you might have been dealt a bad hand or tilted, or just things like that might cause you to get a little more emotional about a game than not. Next up is knocking a guy out of top 8. This was actually a pseudo friend of mine. Like, we weren't close friends or anything, but you go to tournaments enough times in the same city, you end up seeing the same people, meeting the same and talking to them. And so this was it was a win-in for him, I believe. Long story short, I take that back. Long story short, I was playing mono red. I was playing a very aggressive deck. And in this format, it was extremely beneficial to be on the play. Extremely. And I believe this was actually in RPTQ, which is the last tournament to go to the Pro Tour. And if we drew, which is typical procedures, like standard, like, hey, look, we're both in, so let's just draw. So, he would have had a chance to be in, like he would have came in on 8th, maybe on tiebreakers. And I would have finished on like the 4th seat or 5th, something like that. But doing the math and talking to my friends, if I had played him and won, that would solidify me in the number 1 seat and knocking him out of top 8. And so I had a decision to make. And if it was a PTQ, I might have just taken the draw, but the fact that it was the RPTQ, so literally me winning was the make or break difference of going to the Pro Tour for the first time or not. And all my friends' encouragement, I decided to play. And he tilted immediately, like right off the bat. As soon as he was like, man, I'd really like to draw. And, I went back and forth and I was like, hey, man, I'm sorry, but I want to play, And so he immediately tilted because he knew the matchup and he knew he was a poor favor. So he ended up just throwing his cards on the table. He played the games, but he just, for all intents and purposes, did everything but concede to me. I beat him, knocked him out of top 8, and I solidified first place. I felt really horrible about that. Don't get me wrong, I would have still done it. After the fact, later on, I contacted him and I was like, hey, look, I do apologize for doing it. Let me pay for your next tournament admission. And I know it's not the same, but at least it's something. And he even said, he's like, look, that's not necessary. Don't worry about it. Like, honestly, after cooling down, if I was in your shoes, I would have done the same thing. And so we understood that it was a tournament. And even though we're friends, like, we weren't a team or anything, we weren't like close friends. And it really made a big difference because in Magic, the higher seed always plays first. So by me locking up first place and being the mono red player, I would have literally played first every single match up until the end. So let me know actually in the comments below if you would have played it out or not. All right. And then finally, the fact that, like, for example, we have people that are well known in the Eternal community through streaming, through continuous high finishes or top finishes in tournaments. And so typically those people are rooted for, right? And there have been several times in my Magic career where I've gone to the larger tournaments like Grand Prix where you have 1,200 players playing and I end up being matched up against a pro. Surprisingly enough, I think I'm actually like 3-1 against pro players, which is really funny. Granted, 2 of those are limited wins, and then constructed I'm 1-1. But anyways, I think I'm like 3-1. I've gone up against Brad Nelson. I've gone against the Canadian now that is not Martel. The name escapes me. Anywho, but in those case scenarios, right? There's that very obviously is a trade-off. Like, all my friends were rooting for me to beat them, and then everyone that didn't know who I was Joe Schmo Magic player, and everyone that knew who Brad Nelson was, for example, or if I was in an Eternal ECQ, if I went up against like Tony G or Popotito, like everyone would be cheering for them and not me because I am the random factor, the faceless enemy, so to speak. And so, you can't let it get to you. The stress will get to you and stuff, but reward yourself for the victory and don't beat yourself up for the defeat, because understand that you aren't always a hero, so you're not always destined to win and have the happy ending. So it was a little bit of a tangent, guys, but I feel like it was something that really helped me kind of flip the coin and see the wider picture in things. And you guys can see it on my stream. There's several times where I might kind of have the bad beats, but in the end I understand that's the way the game goes and that's why we have fun. And sometimes you're on the receiving end of luck and sometimes you are on the receiving end of bad luck. But either way, we enjoy the game, we enjoy the path to get there. And so, oh, and I think I did mention this in the last podcast, but as far as lucky top decks go, when you tilt because of the top deck, right? They just had the one card that got them out of it. Go back and look at your gameplay or think about your game and see if there was a point in the game where you could have done things differently to avoid being in that situation. Actually, yeah, I'm almost positive I said this in the last podcast. Long story short, you know, if they top deck the torch to kill you, was there a chance where you could have made another block or killed something a little bit sooner or done something to where you weren't at 3 or 2 life in that scenario? Instead, you were at 5 or 6, so the top deck torch wouldn't have killed you. That helps deal with tilt as well. But all right, guys, that's it for that tangent. Let's go into our main topic. And because of the nature of our main topic being playing around combat tricks, I'm actually going to do our what's the play here first because it has relevance to our main topic. All right, guys, let me set the scene for you. Our opponent is at 13 life. They have a 2/5 top tracker in play. They have the 2/2 that gives all your spells warp in play. Both are exhausted. They have 3 out of 4 power open, and they are Elysian, so time primal. We have 6 power open, 2 fire, 4 primal. We have and they have 4 cards in hand. I apologize. We have 3 cards in hand with a primal sigil, a Shugo tactics, the +4/+2 and overwhelm at fast speed for 2, and the I am so bad with names. The 2/2 for 3 and a red outlaw or gunslinger that you can shift for 5 to give another unit double damage. On the board, we are at 17 health, and on the board we have a 4/1 apprentice, the quick draw, and then gets a +1 attack when it attacks on play, but is permafrosted. We have a 3/3 Yeti instigator, and then the 3/1 red unit that is shifted with 2 tick marks. So I ask you, what's the play? We could shift in the outlaw, I'm going to say, or the renegade, I think is what it is, to cover fire something, marksman, cover fire marksman, I believe. The Yeti, and then attack. We aren't able to leave up the Shugu standard. So I wasn't sure if I wanted to play around a bounce effect or a like blink or lightning strike. And so I went ahead and just attacked with the Yeti, see if there was a stop, and there was, and then proceeded to post combat play the cover fire renegade, double damaging the Yeti, and then passing the turn. This notified me that there was a stop as well, I believe, at the end of turn, which allowed me to say that they could still have lightning strike or blink, but I also then took lightning strike off the table and had them on either blink or furnish or refresh or refurbish, because of the fact that lightning strike would have only triggered in combat, and not having the Shugo standard up for to counteract the lightning strike made me like not want to waste, because we, you know, potentially if we attacked with the 3/3 and they lightning striked, then we would have lost the 3/3, we would have lost the double damage, and then that would have been all she wrote, right? But because they have 2 solid blockers for our 2/2, even if it is shifted, it comes out later on. And they have Peak Talk Trapper that can equal Tracker, which can equal a lot of damage, especially having the 2/2 to make all their guys or all their spells have warp. So it gave them access to essentially 1 extra card. Versus if we attacked and then they killed the 3/3, then we played it. Well, granted, we couldn't shift the 3/1 either. We could have maybe held on to it, or just played it not shifted so it can attack. Or we would have had the Shugo standard up to essentially counteract the lightning strike by giving it an additional +2 health. So I think by sacrificing a little bit of damage now, bringing him closer to lethal, we made the safer play and were able to identify a little bit better what was in their hand. So let me go ahead and play it just to double check what continued to happen after that. But sure enough, I believe we attacked. They decided not to kill the instigator, so it got in there for 3. And then we played, as we stated, we played the renegade, giving our guy double strike or double damage. Correction, sorry, magic term. And then the following turn, we were able to Shugo tactics to take them out. So that's what's the play, guys. Let me know if you would have played it a little differently, if you would have been aggressive, if you would have done the Shugo standard regardless, or if you would just taken the chance and played the double damage pre-combat to get him for a potential 6, because if they did kill it, you lost out that double damage, but you would have had the renegade emerge and been able to hit for 12 by using the Shugo standard on that. So let me know in the comments below or on Twitch. Come hang out and let me know what you guys would have done there. But that was me kind of switching gears and realizing that in this position of the game, it was our game to lose, if that makes sense, and not necessarily like how do we win. We already had our path of victory. We were already ahead, so it was a matter of making sure that we stayed ahead. So throwing away cards just didn't seem beneficial to me. So yeah, that's how I played it out. Let me know. I'm interested to see if you guys have different lines. But that is a great segue into our main topic, which is playing around combat tricks specific to the Dark Frontier format. So I want to take a quick moment to give a shout out to Ben Gracier from the Farming Eternal podcast. I used the data from his 7-win spreadsheet and subsequent spreadsheets, collecting information off the 7-win deck list that people send in. So these are numbers accurate to the winning decks, not just the entire format as a whole. So I went ahead and wrote down all the frequencies of each combat trick. These are fast spells that pump or do a certain something like a bounce effect. And we're going to go down the line, starting from the least frequent to the most frequent, talking about how you can try to identify them and how to play around them, because I do think they are important and it can really, really make the difference in a limited game. If a lot of you have been playing limited long enough to know that sometimes just a single combat phase can make or break a game for someone based on how big of a blowout a combat trick is. Sometimes you are able to play around them, sometimes you are not. Speaking of which, let's go ahead and just carry on with that. You are able to play around combat tricks when you A, have an answer to them in hand, B, you have a more commanding board presence, C, you are able to essentially slow down a little bit and not give up too much tempo or value by doing so, or yeah, I guess that's pretty much it, really. I mean, there's a couple of small things, you know, like deadly might make a difference, or evasion, that's another way that you don't have to, you know, play around. The certain ways when you cannot play around them is when A, you know you have absolutely no answer to that in your deck. B, you are at a tempo advantage and cannot afford to give up the tempo, like your opponent is very close to turning the corner, so you have to remain the aggressor. And C, when you just have no answer to it in your deck, no way to play around it, if that makes sense. Like, and D, when you do the math and kind of look ahead and be like, okay, if I play around this combat trick, is my opponent able to leave it up every turn? Am I allowed to play? Is it possible for me to play around it for the rest of the game? Sometimes there's going to be scenarios where you just have to walk into it to get it out of their hand. One last thing to this, you also have to adjust the value of said combat trick. For example, on my stream, a lot of you will catch me saying that, yeah, I understand they might have the daring maneuver here or the retribution or something like that, and I play into it anyways because I'd rather them use it on a 2 or 3 drop when I have my 5 or 6 drop in my hand. That's one less card they are able to use against it, because in most cases limited decks only have somewhere between 5 to 7 forms of interaction. And if we can get some of those better tricks out of their hand prior to our larger units coming into play, then it makes a world of difference. This also is a tempo thing as well. If they want to attack with their 2/2 into your 2/2, and so obviously they are either trying to trigger onslaught or they have a trick, if it makes sense for you to cause them to take up their entire, if your 2-drop is worth them taking a turn off to kill it, then that is perfectly fine as well. So those are just a couple of quick scenario snippets on whether you can afford to play around or not play around a combat trick, and I hope that is helpful. All right, guys, so as I stated earlier, I went ahead and used one of the spreadsheets that Ben Gracier so graciously puts his hard work and thought into to create. So definitely should give him a shout out and a thank you whenever you are able to interact with him. This would not be possible without him and the rest of the guys at Farming Eternal. So let's go ahead and start at the bottom of the line, and then at the end I'll do a little bit of removal. First up, we have Light 'em Up. So let me go ahead and put this on screen real quick for you guys that are watching this on YouTube. All right. Actually, give me 1 second, guys. Gonna make this a little bit bigger. So I do apologize for the delay for those of you listening in, but I think it's gonna pay off in the long run. So why not? Because we're all about the quality here on. There we go. Yeah, that looks better. All right. So Light 'em Up is your units get a +1 attack this turn fast spell for 1 in a red. So you typically this one, and it shows up 2% of the time, or in 2% of the decks. So every deck that has 7 wins on their spreadsheet, which I believe last time they checked they said they were in the 7 or 800s, is 0.02 times you will see this. So not very often. That being said, I do think this card is very easy to telegraph. Reason being is they are typically found in go wide strategies. And so obviously one thing I will say with all of these is you want to look at what colors are available for your opponent. It's not like Magic where you have specific lands. If they have the influence, they have the influence for every power they have. But what I'm saying is obviously if this is a fire spell, so if they're not playing fire, then you don't have to worry about it. So I'm not gonna go ahead and bring that up every time. It's like, well, do they have Primo open? Like, just understand that you want to adjust these to the color of your opponent's deck. Okay. So once again, this one is fairly easy to identify because of the fact that you're gonna see a deck with a lot of 1, 2s, and 3 drops. So they are able to flood the board, or cards that generate more than 1 unit. So things like Manufacture or Grenadin Drone, or even if they are Stone Scar, the Blood Nurse. So they're able to spit out multiple 1/1s, or I guess even Praxis, where they can run the Ooze and pump it several times to get a bunch of 2/2s. And the way you see this coming is it's still hard to identify because of the fact that it is 1 power. Any tricks that are 1 power are quite good because of the fact that you're able to hide them somewhat. It's easy to leave a 1 power. Long story short, they're going to attack with everything. The reason being is they know they're going to sacrifice X amount of units to your blockers, but Light 'em Up might allow them to trade up some of those blocks, i.e. where it would have been a chump attack, it might end up killing your unit, and then they get as much damage as possible with all the units that aren't going to get blocked. And so hopefully have enough damage to kill you or put them in a commanding board position after that, where you thought you were easily blocking, instead you lose like 2 or 3 units. So to play around this, it's pretty straightforward. You just make blocks the best you can in, i.e. trading what you are comfortable trading with, and then maybe blocking less damage to make sure that your guys stay alive. If, like for example, if they're attacking your 2/1 or a 2/2 into, your 3/3, well, if you think they have Light 'em Up, you might instead block a 1/1 or a 1/2 and allow the 1 extra damage to get in from the 2/2, because that way if they do have Light 'em Up, your 3/3 will still stay alive versus trading. This also allows you to leave up things like Defiant or any kind of removal spells, any fast removal spells for essentially a unit that isn't blocked. So if they do have Light 'em Up, you can kill that unit response and negate some more damage that would have gone to your face. But I'm not going to spend too much time on these early ones because, like I said, they may or may not be easier to play around, but they are not really found very frequently in the top decks. So that's why we are going to focus on the ones that do show up. So next up in ascending order is Inner Might, which that is funny. So I did not put it. Wow, I am batting 1,000 right now. I did not put it on my my deck list. I have a little deck list made for the podcast, so I could just go down each of them, but that's fine. We will throw it up there. So Inner Might. Okay, so Inner Might is a, once again, fast spell uncommon for 3 Justice. The premium artwork on it is awesome. Give one of your units +1/+1 this turn, plus an additional +1/+1 for each other spell in your void. So this one only shows up another 0.02% of decks. So I wouldn't try to play around this one too much. It being 3 makes it a little easier to identify because of the fact that the other more common one is High Alert, and that one is at 4, which we'll talk about later. So if they are attacking in a position where you think they might have a pump spell, and one of the ones that your Sharpened Reflex might not be there, like the +1/+1 won't do it, then you can start considering Inner Might of note. And then to figure out is fairly simple. All you have to do is look at their void and see how many spells they have, and you can kind of gauge if that would be enough to kill your unit or kill you or win combat, and then you could adjust your blocks or maybe your tricks accordingly. Once again, this one only comes up in very few decks, so I'm not gonna spend too much time on it. I honestly think I might have seen it one time in the entire time I've been playing, but those are some of the ways you can see. And then obviously the double justice is a thing that is something you can look for. I will talk about that a little bit, is because obviously if they have justice, you're going to play around justice combat tricks, but the fact that this one requires double justice means you can look and see if they, if they have double justice, then this is on the table. If they only have a single justice influence, obviously it's off the table. Just that simple. So that is Inner Might. Next up, we have a Viper's Bite, which is a time trick. Viper's Bite is a fast spell for 4 in a time, and give one of your units deadly. So I feel like more often than not, this card ends up just being a natural 2-for-1 for your opponent, because of the fact that you're already, most likely you're going to be attacking into something that you have a favorable blocks or attacks for. So if you have favorable attacks, chances are they have unfavorable blocks, and thus Viper's Bite, they'll end up putting it on, like, for example, let's say a 2/2 to take out your 7/7 worm. So they are spending 2 cards to take out your 1, but they did trade up somewhat, sometimes occasionally on power, sometimes not, but they are down a card in the exchange. The fact that it's 4 does make it a little easier to see. And then this is, once again, I'm probably gonna say this now and just kind of cross it over and lightly touch on it next, but anytime your opponent is making unfavorable blocks or unfavorable attacks, that should let you know that something is up. Unless even new players kind of can see simple math, and why would I attack my 2/2 into your 2/3/3s? It doesn't make sense. So you have to assume that something is up. Viper's Bite shows up 0.05 times per deck, and so it is slightly more common, but as you see, it's not nearly as much as we would see later on in these other cards. So you don't have to play around it all that often. You might want to also look for potential synergies, things like units with low attack and high power health. Like for example, look at the 1/5 defender that has deadly. They put deadly on that because it just having 1 power means that it can kill anything it deals damage to, but the 5 toughness means it survives a lot. So look at that as well. If your opponent's playing some, the only thing that really comes to mind right now is the Watchful Monera, which is the 2/4, but things like that, if they're blocking, clearly you're attacking with a 7/7 and then they block with their Monera, there's a chance that there's something up. So you may or may not want to use the combat trick. Things like that. If they pass with 4 power open, that tells you something. 4 power is a lot to leave open. So you definitely have to gauge that as well. That's typically the biggest indicator of it, is some kind of unfavorable attack or block. There's not much you can do with the blocking side of it. There you just have to be attentive if their playstyle is relevant to, like, would they have casted something there if they had it, you know? So that is Viper's Bite. Next up is a Meditation. Meditation, I feel like, honestly, is more for your removal spells than it is for attacks or anything like that. The fact that it takes, Meditation, once again, a time fast spell for 1 at a time. Give one of your units +2/+2 and put it on the top of your deck. So it does buff the unit, but it takes it out of combat and places it on the top of their deck. They are going down a card doing this because they aren't drawing the card, it's just going back on top of their deck. So they're essentially giving their unit a delayed +2/+2 and saving it from combat. So this isn't too big of a deal to play around when it comes into combat tricks, unless, you know, they're using it as a pseudo 1-for-1 where you have a 5/5, they have a 5/5, you attack into them because you have the pummel, and then they block and you're like, haha, pummel, and then they Meditation to bounce their guy, buffing it, bounce it back, stopping it from dying in combat, and they don't kill your guy, but you do lose your pummel. So this one is more of a defensive thing. It can be offensive as well. They can attack. For example, let's say you have like a worm, a 7/7 worm, and then they have 2 4/4s. They can attack with their 4/4s, and then whichever one you block, they bounce it back into the top of their deck, saving it from combat, and then the other 4/4 hits you in the face. So it's really tough you're not too worried about losing anything in this card. It's actually impossible to it, but you want to be cognizant of your removal spells and your pump spells on the aggressive side, or for the same thing. They attack with a 4/4, you have a 3/3, you block and then high alert it, and then before your guy can get buffed and kill their dude, they bounce it and they took the high alert out of your hand. Things like that. So that's why I did mention on the show, this one you will see 0.05 times per deck. So it is something to worry about. I think I have seen it twice, and it does do some work. Like, typically the card is not that strong, but when you're able to, you know, bounce it when you're trying to retribute something or cast retribution on something, or when you use your premium, you know, let's say Spiteful Strike, that would be a backbreaker. You gain no life, you don't kill their unit, and their unit gets bigger. Like, that's a pretty good blowout. So it is something to take in consideration. Once again, it's the standard. Look for on blocking. Sometimes people are just gonna chump block. Like I said, the fact that you're not gonna lose your unit makes it to where I really wouldn't play around this card very often. If they have it, they have it. If they don't, they don't. I would just take note of it when you're trying to use maybe your 1 retribution or 1 eviscerate or your 1 flame slash, flame blast, flame strike, the red finisher, to do it. But that is Meditation. Moving right along, we have Isolate. Let's get that one up there. And I actually do apologize because I did not look this one up, and so I don't have a number. Oh wait, yes I did. I just didn't add it to my thing. Sorry, I punted. Yeah, I even punted my podcast. Look at that. So this one shows up just slightly above Meditate and Viper's Bite at 0.06 of the decks play it. And so Isolate is extremely easy to play around if you know it's there. It does require, so long story short, I don't know, it's tough because here's the thing. Typically what Isolate is going to take out is an emerged unit or a flyer. If you're in a position where you only have a flyers, you have a stalled board state and your flyer is the only thing that's going to get in, Isolate could be a thing. By that point, they're going to have enough power to where it's going to be easy to leave up too. But if you feel like their playstyle has, like for example, if you've gotten in there with 2 units and they've just not been able to do anything, but for whatever reason they kill your other unit, an emerged unit comes out and that's it. Here's the thing, right? You kind of have to be intuitive about Isolate because of the fact that it's easy to play around, but just as easy to hide it because of that fact. There have been times where I've had an isolate in my hand and my opponent just naturally played around it without knowing it. They just had a solid attack and they kept doing it. And then the one turn that something happened where they couldn't have that solid second attack, it just gets there. Now, I will say I would only play around it when you feel like the unit it would kill is 100% worth it. For example, if you have some rare flyer, let's say Shilluk Captain, right? The 5/5 flyer for 6. It's a really valuable unit. Last thing you want to do, and can win you the game on its own. So if you feel like they might have it, sometimes you might want to consider either attacking, like chump attacking with something else, or attacking with everything if you can afford it. Obviously, if you won't die on the crackback, to eliminate isolate, but then also like force them to make their play. You know what I'm saying? A combat trick or pump spell in your hand isn't going to save you from your unit from isolate, because it literally just has to attack alone, doesn't care the size and stuff like that. So the way to play around it is to simply just attack with more than one unit, which is self-explanatory. But I would say that you can work it to where you start to gain value on the board, where maybe you attack with your best blocker, if it's a big unit, to force them to at least they'll have to double block, and then you get one of their cards off the board and you get an attack with your big flyer. Now, if it's like something like a flickerling, you know what I mean? Losing a 2/2 flyer, it's not that big of a deal. I wouldn't risk throwing away another card to get in the attack. So yeah, shoot it in there and see if they kill it or not. Once again, they get it out of the way, so your bigger emerged units might work out. Playing around it as well, if you feel, is just don't attack. Don't attack and force them to leave up 2 every turn. Like, that is obviously a very good way to work around it. All right, not much to say on that one just because of how narrow it is. Next up, we have Lock Horns. So Lock Horns is another 1 cost. It's 1 in the shadow for give a unit +3 and -1 this turn. The interesting thing about Lock Horns is the fact that it gives plus on the attack and minus on the health. Makes it very versatile or flexible, and thus kind of hard to play around sometimes. The fact that it's 1 power means that it's kind of easy to snuff out when they're playing Shadow. And then, once again, context, because we also have Spiteful Strike at 1 that we'll talk about later, which is a great card as well, which plays a little different than Lock Horns. So it makes it a little bit harder to play around, because it could be potential of 2, and both kind of work out in that play. Sometimes they're going to -1 to kill your twisted unit. Sometimes they're going to get a deadly unit out of the board or out of the way, and sometimes they're going to wait till after damage. Like their 2/3 attacks your 2/3, you both block, they bounce off each other, and then they finish your guy off with the -1 on Lock Horns. The flip side to that is they trade up. They're attacking with a 2/2, you block with your 5/5, and then they give it Lock Horns, so it becomes a 5/1 and trades with your guy. So standard, like I said earlier, this one, play around if it's like unfavorable attacks or something that seems a little sneaky, work around that. As far as the offensive side of it, the other way to play around it is just to make sure that you don't do blocks or twist a unit to where it's left at 1 health if you suspect them having it. That way they can only kill or use it with the +3 -1. Like the +3 attack is the only way they're going to kill you or one of your units with it, and the fact that it weakens their unit means that you're more likely to trade, so you get a 2-for-1 in your favor off of it. So that's the biggest way I would say to play around, is just not make the -1 to health relevant on your end, i.e. not giving them an excuse to use it on your unit. Instead, force them to use Lock Horns on their unit, and then they're 2-for-1ing themselves typically. Lock Horn shows up. This is our first double digit, 1.14 in 0.14 decks out of 800 and something decks. So this one's going to be a little more common. I feel like it's a 1 of. I don't see many decks playing 2 of in them. So if you see 1, you can probably safely not play around a second one. I know I only play 1 because it is still pretty narrow. You might see this a little more and more aggressive decks because the +3 attack might help get in there. I could see it in larger units, but a 5/5 getting pumped up to an 8/4 is a thing, but I think it's more likely going to be seen play in more aggressive decks. So be on the lookout for that. Next up, we have our first standard at 0.19% or representation, and this is Cabal standard. This one is one of my personal favorites because of the fact that it goes onto units. So, easiest way to start to play around a standard is to A, see the color, but B, make sure they have 5 power. Standards are depleted power that become a spell, a tactic. Once they have 5 power, they are automatically transmuted into the spell. Cabal tactic or Cabal standard becomes Cabal tactic, which gives 2 of your units plus 2 attack and quick draw this turn. This card is a blowout because it not only buffs attack, but it also gives them quick draw. So it allows you to it's really difficult to play around because of the fact that typically you want to overload your opponent's attacks with blockers, so a combat trick, they can't save everything, right? So you double block 2 different units, so that way even if they have a trick, at least one is going to die. And maybe if your units are dispersed stat wise correctly, you can even push through the combat trick and still like 2 for 2 and kill their unit anyways. But the fact that standard hits 2 units makes that extremely difficult, and quick draw is just so huge because of the fact that, you know, let's say they attack with whatever, a 4/4. You block with a 5/5 and a 3/3. Well, they quick draw. Plus and quick draw, they can kill the 5/5 first before any damage is dealt. So then the 3/3 doesn't have enough attack left to kill their unit. So it's a complete blowout. So yeah, Cabal tactic is great. I think the biggest way is when you see. The biggest way to play around it is to just literally look at the board state and see what would happen if they had that trick. And I know it kind of goes across for everything, but they're going to attack with more than 1 unit. That's your first indicator, right? If there's 2 bad attacks, then that kind of should put Cabal standard on your radar. And then look and see, like, all right, if both those units get +2 in quick draw, is that a blowout? And if it is, chances are they may have it. You know, if there's a way you can play around it, i.e. with blocks and stuff, or maybe a pump spell, then that may or may not be, but you do want to adjust that and see if it will just utterly decimate you. Then sometimes it might be better just not block if you can afford it, and just force them to either leave up the 2 next turn or not. Or the fact that they attacked with 2 units means they might not have such great blocks anymore, and then you can swing back. Granted, they can still use it on defense, but their units won't have the quick draw effect. So that's how I would play around Cabal standard. So consider that in your next match. Moving right along, we're going to start to see a little more frequency in these. Next up is another standard, which is Crown Watch standard. This is the Justice one, and this one has a 0.21 frequency index. This one is quite a race changer. I like this one quite a bit. Crown Watch standard, once again, 5. It is a power, depleted power, but they need to have 5 power to transmute it into Crown Watch tactic, which Crown Watch tactic for 2 injustice, give a unit +3/+3 and lifesteal this turn. So, once again, standard, make sure they're playing justice, make sure they have 5 power, or 5 influence, I'm sorry. 5 power, 5 power, correct. And so they have 2 power open, at least. And once again, this one, I would look and see if they were aggressive. If you guys were in a racing scenario, did it seem like they felt fairly confident that they were, like, you know what I mean? Like if they were allowing you guys were just trading blows, that might be a signifier that they have this, because it is going to be, you know, bare minimum. Let's say they throw this on a 2/2, it is a 10-point life swing. So, you know, they're dealing 5 damage and they're gaining 5 life, or they might kill one of your blockers or attackers to prevent damage and then gain life. So it's a huge blowout when it comes to race scenarios. In a more stalled board state, don't get me wrong, it's still going to kill a unit, and sometimes the lifesteal is going to be relevant, especially if you're both kind of trading off aggressively. But mainly you're looking at the +3/+3, and it doesn't matter, it can be done on offense and defense. So Like I said, I see us kind of talking less and less as we progress, mainly because a lot of these overlap with each other. There are certain characteristics or corner cases for each one. I'll point those out, but there's some that are just going to be like there all the time. And like I said, on attacks, both Cabal and Crown Watch Standard are going to be kind of hard to see coming because there's multiple things that fit that slot, especially in Justice, because Justice is seeing multiple cards take up those slots, which I just realized that I am missing one. So I will just throw it in when we get to its partner in crime. But yeah, I really don't have anything too specific about Crown Watch Standard, to be completely honest with you guys. Just be on the lookout, obviously, play around the +3/+3, which you should be doing already because it overlaps with the +3/+3 from High Alert, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So nothing too much. I'm not going to spend too much time. We'll move right along to Blink. So Blink is how do I not... Man, I swear, guys. Sometimes I don't know what I'm doing with myself. Blink. All right, let's get Blink on there. I don't have a premium one. Oh, how insulting. Okay, so Blink is 3 in a time. It has Warp. Put a unit into its owner's hand. So this is a tempo type card. What I mean by tempo, or what is meant, is that they are putting a card back into your hand. Obviously it says owner's hand, so it could be their own as well, to take advantage of some kind of either A, save their unit from dying, or B, to take advantage of a summon effect. But let's say they're still using it on your unit. It is a tempo play because they are forcing you to miss an attack, recast the unit, so costing you power and that turn for a card. Typically this is more beneficial to more aggressive decks. So you stabilize, you hit your 4 power, you drop your 4/4, and now they can't attack into you. They bounce it, so they reset your turn, and then they get in for more damage. That's typically how you take advantage of Blink effects. Here, 3 power, once again, the tricky part is sometimes you can't really go around using your the amount of cards in your opponent's hand, just because this has Warp, so they could play it off the top of their deck. The benefit to that, which we'll talk about as well with High Alert, is just the fact that when a card has Warp and it is on the top of their deck, you are more incentivized to play it. So you essentially, quote unquote, draw that card. And so Blink is a little bit harder because of the fact that at the end of the day, you can still just blink their guy and cause them a little bit of tempo. High Alert is going to be a little bit more beneficial to play around in that manner, and I'll talk about that when we get there. But yeah, this is like, it's tough to play around it when it comes to defense, because if you just don't attack into anything, which is fine, they can still just bounce their unit, and then they'll do it end of turn, so you essentially don't get to play it post combat. So what I would do is, if you're putting them on Blink and you have positive or profitable attacks, I would just attack anyways as is and force them to use it. Now, the caveat to this though is you want to have profitable attacks without using tricks. So if it's one of those things where you have to use your pummel or your Crown Watch tactics to make this a profitable attack, and you are putting them on Blink, then I would not attack. Now, if it's a case where they have a 2/2 and a 5/5, or a 2/2 and a 3/3, and then you have a Sandworm, then yeah, by all means attack, and then force their hand to, either take 7 damage, lose a chump blocker, or they, in the middle of combat, blink your guy, and then you're able to recast it post combat. That's how I would play around it. I would not use any combat tricks or pump spells, because then they are getting you on tempo as well as being even on cards, because your unit is not dying, but they are taking the combat trick out of your hand, and you're not getting a card out of it. It's just going to your void. So that would play into the Blink. So that's how I would play around it, is essentially not use any kind of weapons or something that goes on a unit. I would also, that's a good one as well. Yeah, there you go. That's another good one. So let's say you have a 2/2 with a +3/+3, the Caleb's Persuader on it, right? Caleb's Persuader is awesome. If you have them on Blink, I would attack with other units and leave that unit behind. So what's happening is that they can still, if they want to take the weapon off of your 2/2, they can, but you aren't you're only down a card, not 2, because that's another way a blink is valuable, is you attack with a suited up 5/5, but when they blink it, never mind, I got ahead of myself. I was thinking they blink the weapon and then they block the 2/2, but never mind. Disregard that. Either way, blink is only going to get a card out of your hand, but at least not attacking with it will cause them to have to make the decision as whether they want to. I guess Caleb's Persuader you would still attack because it'll give you the fire sigil anyways. So that was a really bad example, but you could potentially not attack with that one unit. And so forcing them to, hey, do you want to deal with the guys that are attacking, or do you want to deal with the unit that has the weapon that I left back? In most cases, you still want to just attack with it, but sometimes it might allow them, it might force them to, it might be a little skewed and be like, huh. Plus, it also incentivizes you to use the combat trick on something else in response to them blinking your guy. Typically, they'll probably wait till end of turn, but you know, it is what it is. So that's how I would play around blink, guys. Let's see. Moving down the list, we have Furnish at 0.25. How? What? Oh, I know what it was. These were off to the side. Okay, these I kind of snuck in because the way I had the list, it was a little furbish. Why is it not showing up? Oh, because I don't have primal. That's odd. I don't know why Furnish was not on there. I do apologize. Let me make sure Spiteful Strike is on there too. I'll do that all. And yeah, these and Shugo. Oh no, that one I did have. See, Shugo Standard and Flash Grenade. There we go, and Detain. Okay, there we go. Back on track, guys. I do apologize for that. Slight technical difficulties, but let's go with Furnish. So Furnish is actually kind of easy to pick up on, honestly. Primal is a very underrepresented color, and so typically if they're playing it and they seem to have a good amount of primal, especially if they're not Elysian or having time for refresh, then they're gonna have Furnish. The easiest way to pick up on this is if they have a stop in combat, but then they have a stop at the end of your turn. In most cases, it's gonna be, you know, they're gonna be playing either Lightning Strike or Furnish are the only two big cards I can think of that are at fast speed. So even the Cabal Standard or the Primal Standard is attacking unit, so it won't trigger at the end of turn. So if you see that they have a stop at the end of their or your turn, chances are they have a Furnish, and this one is going to be seen once again 0.25 representation in decks. In 0.25 of the decks are gonna have whatever. Jeez, need caffeine. Wow, why do you guys listen to me? Just terrible. Anywho, so this one's pretty simple to play around. The only time that you really get blown out by this is if you're trying to use a damage base removal spell on the unit and they're able to buff it. The way you would play around this is just doing it outside of combat, so outside of their combat, so they don't have onslaught triggered, so it's only a +1 health instead of +3. The other side of that as well is to block with units that won't die to their unit regardless. Like, don't trade off. Like, don't block their 3/3 with your 3/3. Instead, block with a 3/4 or something like that. You know, your Vorlunk. That way, even if they keep their guy alive, there's really no way for your guy to die. They're mainly trying to take advantage of this with like twist effects, I guess. So yeah, Furnish, we're not gonna spend too much time on. Pretty much, they just have a stop, and it doesn't make sense. Like as far as a damage-based removal spell or a bounce spell or a freeze. Yeah, or flash freeze, that could be it. Flash freeze might be it, but typically I would put them on Furnish, especially if they have 1 power left. If they have 1 power open, like it's almost 95% positive it's gonna be Furnish. But like I said, because it only buffs health, it's pretty easy to play around. Next is a doozy one. This one is another blowout. Thank you, Shadow, and in the form of Spiteful Strike that you'll see it in 0.26 of the decks or frequency. This one is, or you see in 26% of the decks. This one is give a unit +2/+1 lifesteal and quick draw this turn for 1 and a shadow. So very difficult card to see coming because of the fact that it is 1 shadow. That being said, if they have a stop at 1, you just kind of do the math, see if lock horns would be beneficial or not here. If it isn't, then chances are it's going to be Spiteful Strike, obviously, unless you're playing around Char, Detain, or all the... I'm mainly going if you can identify that it is a shadow spell. So for these cheaper ones, you want to keep track or identify things in the early game. Sometimes you'll see me on stream if I have for example, let's say I have a Spiteful Strike in my hand. And that's a bad example because I think it won't trigger if there's no units on the board. But Flash Grenade, there you go. I will try to play my other sigils first, so I lack the Justice influence until I can start playing units and depleting all that power. So they can't say turn 1 or turn 2. They're like, oh, they have a fast spell already. You want to make them work for that information. And so you can do the same, identifying what influences your opponent's playing initially and if there are any stops or not. Spiteful Strike is insanely better on the offense because of the fact you can take advantage of the quick draw, but it is still good on defense because of the fact that it does give the unit a +1 health as well, and it's lifesteal, so it's relevant. So this one, long story short, like I said, if they have 1 power open and they have shadow influence, I would go between the two, between Lock Horns and Spiteful Strike, and see if it is a blowout or not. Or when you're attacking, it's much easier to play around Spiteful Strike because of the fact that their unit won't get quick draw. So if you have any kind of pump or just favorable attacks that won't die to the +2 attack, then you're good. If they have the double block, you're still getting your 2 for 1 out of it. On defense, that is something to consider because once again, quick draw does take a unit completely out. So sometimes even double blocking is not enough to take care of it. You definitely don't want to single block. I would either leave up the pump spell. The sad part is that there's no way to order there's no response window after damage is ordered. Like there is in Magic where you could be like, okay, I'm attacking this guy first, then this guy. So you could just pump the first guy. There is none of that in Eternal. So you're just at the mercy of the fact that you're going to lose something. So for example, if you block with 2 units, and I would just automatically pump the bigger unit because they can easily, regardless of which one you pump, they're going to kill the one they can kill. So you might as well keep your bigger unit alive. That's another way to somewhat play around it when it comes to like double and triple blocking, is if you have a trick to keep one of your guys from dying, or at least they're not going to kill the unit they thought they were going to. That's a good way to take advantage of it. Next up, we have one of my favorites, which is Shugo Standard. Okay, much like the other standards, once again, this is the fire one that at 5 power it transmutes into Shugo Tactic. Oh, that's funny. I don't know if you guys heard that, but I totally just clicked accidentally to destroy it. I was like, no, it's a premium one. All right, but we fixed it. It's fine. That would have been too funny. Wow, is it really 1600 to create a premium uncommon? That is insane. That's crazy. Anywho, Shugo Tactic becomes Shugo Tactic is a 2 power fast spell. Give a unit +4/+2 and overwhelm this turn. This card is awesome. It's really hard to play around because of the overwhelm. So even if you're blocking, the fact that it only gives a +2 health to their unit means that there's a good chance you can still kill their unit. I would, if you assume or putting them on over Shugo Tactic, I would double or triple block. Just realize that there is a chance that you will lose both of your units, but at least you're getting their unit and their tactic as well. If you are low on health, you have to take the overwhelm into consideration. Sometimes you're just gonna have to do a bunch of chump blocks to make sure that a Shugo Tactic on one of their bigger units is not gonna kill you. So to play around this one, you want to put your highest toughness unit in front of theirs. Potentially one that can go through the +2 additional health, but if not, at the very least, it mitigates as much damage as possible. Because the last thing you want to do is like, oh, I'm going to chump block and put a 1/1 in front of it. And then they Shugo Tactics and 6 damage gets through. So it completely defeats the purpose. you do want to make sure that whatever unit it is dies, because there's nothing worse than, like I said, you lose a unit, they keep their unit, and they deal a bunch of damage to your face. And if it's an aggressive deck, you're going to be low on health, and every point matters. So take that in consideration. If they use it to take out your bigger units, like your Tremor Shockers and things like that, chances are they're just going to be trading 2 for 1, unless obviously they attack their Tremor Shocker into yours, then that's clear as day they've got something. So that's pretty much, it's just upping the high toughness or health of your unit to put in front of it, or multiple units with high toughness, so you can mitigate the overwhelm aspect of it, because the +4/+2 is legit. And that one is actually a little bit lower than the other two. I guess I looked it up a little bit later, but that one's only sees a 24% frequency in dex. Next up, we have another big one, and that's why it is at 36% or 0.36 frequency in dex, is refresh. This is give yourself or a unit +4 health for 2 at a time. You see this a lot in Xenon because of the fact that it takes advantage of all the twist units, or Combre. If your opponent is playing a lot of twist units, just go ahead, and I mean 36 is a lot. So just assume they're going to have at least one of these. Once again, because it is only health buff, chances are it is somewhat easier to play around, because of the fact that as long as they don't have enough attack to kill your unit, then you're in good shape. That being said, though, keep in mind they have the potential of double or triple blocking and then refreshing their most beneficial unit, or the one they rather keep around. So you have to keep that in mind. This also, another way to play around it is preemptive removal. If you have your opponent, like you saw a stop for a refresh earlier in the game, and then they play a unit and twist it, you rather than not twist it a few more times, then go ahead and try to kill that unit while their shields are down and they are tapped out. Like I said, not too much about this one. This one you have to kind of look out for with like behemoths and Torrid test pilots, units that are going to have high attack after they twist a couple times. So when they attack, you're like, oh look, it's a 7/3, so I could totally block it with my 3/3. Well, now refresh is going to end up being worth a card plus some, because they're going to get to twist a bunch now. So take that into consideration when you are putting them on refresh. I think it is good both on offense and defense because of, like I said, the double block potential. So definitely keep an eye on that. Or if it's a scenario where you have to double block, and you're like, all right, well, I'll only lose one guy, but at least I'll get their guy off the board. And then they refresh, and now it turns out that you'll lose your one guy and they keep theirs. Or worst case scenario, you lose both your guys and they keep theirs. So definitely keep in mind for that. And there are the corner cases where if you're doing math, you're like, okay, I can take this much damage. Then if I ace space with everything next turn, they're dead. And you didn't, because you have Exacxes, and then you didn't account for them having the refresh. So when you attack, they refresh themselves and they don't die at 4 health, and then they come back and kill you with the counter attack. So that is very important to think of as well. It can go to face, so think about that. And like I said, you will start, these are the cards that I feel like you're going to start to see in decks. They are common and they are really good and efficient, so you're going to see them more often in decks. These are ones you really should have in your radar all the time. Next up, we have Pummel. This is a fan favorite for most people. It's been around for a good long minute, and I love the artwork. Pummel is for 1 in a red. Give one of your attacking units +2/+2 this turn and scout. So the easiest way to identify Pummel is the stop on attacks only. You see this when after blocks. If you blocked earlier, let's say, for example, you have the 0/7, right? And they're attacking with their 3/3, you block, because why not? What else is a 0/7 going to do? If there's a stop there before damage is dealt, then chances are, and there's no stop outside of their combat, then you could put them on Pummel. That is the easiest thing, easiest way to identify Pummel, and the biggest drawback to it. Sometimes they will just pummel for the scout effect, but most of the time you're going to see it in a position where, like, you block a 2/2 with a 3/3, so the pummel does essentially kill your 3/3 and keep their guy alive. One thing about Pummel is that it does not give overwhelm like the Shugo Tactics or Daring Maneuver does. So sometimes you're just going to want to get it out of their hand. and so your bigger units can stay alive. So understand that sometimes even just blocking a 2/2 with a 2/2, if that's the correct trade for you, then that is a way to play around it. Or as well, just always add +2/+2 to their unit and be like, do, i.e. blocking their 2/2 with your 5/5 instead, so Pummel doesn't do it. Or your, 2/5 recruit blocks their 2/2. Things like that. That's pretty straightforward. This one's kind of low. Like I said, the fact that it only does attacking units means, keep in mind that if you did put them on Pummel, that you don't have to worry about it when you were on the offense. So, and that's a good way to kind of also narrow it down. If you have an attack where maybe Daring Maneuver might have been beneficial on blocks and they didn't use it, that's another indicator that they might have a Pummel. And this one sees almost 40%. This one's at 0.39. All right, so you're going to see this quite a bit as well. It is in the curated packs, and so that's typically where people are going to pick them up, where you're really, I think, Fire's only looking for Gun Down, Blink Wolves, this, and the Sharpshooter. All right at 0.40 is Flash Grenade. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about Detain here as well, because they are similarly costed and have similar effects, but operate slightly different. And I also forgot to look up Detain, so I do not have a frequency on this one. I do think it's gone up in frequency since Man and Mouse has mentioned it, and I've seen some other streamers adapt it. I play at least one of them. Don't really want more than one. Occasionally, if I need spells, I'll play a second one, but I only like running one because it is somewhat narrow. But they are both one-cost flash spells. In Justice, Flash Grenade, enemy units, and relic weapons get a -2 attack this turn, and Detain a given enemy unit -6 attack this turn. So, Pummel or Flash Grenade, like I said, is at 0.40 frequency in decks in the 7-win deck list. And for these, so once again, if you see a stop, the sad part is they don't need to be in combat. So these are just enemy units, so they can be played at any point in time. So there's no way to kind of identify which one it is, except unless if we see attacks in a moment that I tell you about. But if you see any kind of, they have one power up with a Justice Influence any point in the game, and you see a stop at the end of turn or combat, there's a good chance they have this. To play around them, it's tough because they do different things, but they could be a complete blowout in their respective ways. For example, Detain does a lot or decreases a lot of attack on one unit. So if you are attacking with your Tremor Shocker and they can like triple block and then detain it to kill it, well then, it's a card for a card, and they definitely traded up one power for your 6. You know what I mean? So to play around this, you typically want to make multiple favorable attacks. Very rarely are you ever gonna be able to pump past a Detain. -6 is a lot. So for this one, to play around it, you make a bunch of attacks. If you have favorable attacks and Detain will only take out one unit, then that at least makes it to where they're gonna take a bunch of damage to the face, or they're gonna have to chump block, i.e. they triple block or double block one of your units, so extra damage gets in, or they spread out the damage and then they're only detaining to maybe take out your second best unit or something like that. So that is a consideration. It's a good way to deal with flyers and things like that. Flash Grenade, on the other hand, I feel like can be a complete blowout if either decks are on the go wide strategy. So if you're the go wide strategy and you attack, your opponent makes a bunch of blocks that they think are too easy, then you Flash Grenade. Well, all of a sudden, some of your units are bouncing off, some of your units are trading, and yours aren't dying. You know what I mean? On defense, it's a complete blowout if they go wide as well. This one is a little bit easier to play around by just attacking with your bigger units or just one big unit, where you're essentially getting a 1-for-1. Timing on a weapon is critical with this as well. I think that is beneficial if you use it. That's a good way to do it as well, is to attack with a weapon first. So, you know what I mean? To see if they use the Flash Grenade to stop the weapon. I mean, it will hit all your units, but at least you're doing it before you attack with all your units. So if they do the Flash Grenade to shrink your weapon so your weapon doesn't kill one of their units, well, they've already used the flash grenade. You see now that all your guys have -2 attack, and you can just choose not to attack. They're a little difficult to play around because they are 1 cost, and like I said, it's hard to figure out which one they're at because of the fact that they both do completely opposite things. One, you want to attack with just as few creatures or units as possible. The other one, you want to go as wide as possible. So hit or miss. To me personally, I feel like flash grenade can be the bigger blowout since it hits multiple units. So when in doubt and you're not quite sure, I would just play around flash grenade and just bite the bullet if it is detain. Because worst case scenario, you're still only losing 1 unit versus the 2 from flash grenade. And like I said, use your weapon, a weapon, whenever possible. If you have them on flash grenade, you can also maybe instead of attacking your 3/4 mace into their 3/3, you can attack their 3/4 mace into their 2/1. So you still kind of get the trade-off there. But yeah, that's how I would play around those cards. Like, or using them early, like pressuring your opponent to using them early is a good way as well. Like, just get in there and then maybe I've done it before where I'm okay trading a flash grenade for just like a 2/2 or a 3/3 early in the game. Just because that's a good scenario for it. So that's a good way. And then once again, very rarely do I see people playing 2 or 3 of either of these cards. So if you get one out of their hand early, you don't have to worry about it later. Flash grenade, occasionally I'll see the second one, but you know, it is what it is. You can see it similar to where light 'em up was, where if they're making a bunch of attacks with small units that create a bunch of bad attacks, they might have the flash grenade just so they get in extra damage. All right, guys. Next up, we have Sharpen Reflex at a whopping 0.42 frequency in Dex. Sharpen Reflex. This card is... So another issue, obviously, where it falls into. So now Justice has 3 tricks that we are seeing often or frequent at 1. So it's really hard to see between all of them. I just account for 1 extra damage, really, honestly, or 1 extra power if you're going in on, or yeah, it's... This one's a little easier to play around because you just have to play around the +1/+1. You know what I mean? And the good thing about it is that chances are, if your opponent can use it for even just the scout effect, it gives you a permanent +1/+1, so they aren't going to leave it up. So if you really are in a position where, hey, there's no way for me to play around it, just not attacking or not blocking will cause your opponent to still use it. So you are, if it's whether you attack or not, right, then they're only getting the scout out of it. If they are attacking, and you choose not to block, then they're getting an additional 1 damage and the scout out of it. And then you can play around their unit being bigger. That's how I would do it. Nothing too crazy about it. You could always try to respond to it like, hey, I have the pummel. So if the +1/+1, like, i.e., you attack your 3/3 into their 3/3, or Vorlunk into Vorlunk, and they're like, I will give mine a +1/+1 and make it a 4/5 to kill yours. If you have the pummel or something like that to make yours even bigger, then by all means do that. Wait for them to play theirs, and then you can play yours, capitalizing on it and getting a 2-for-1. So that's Sharpen Reflex, but like I said, it is common, it is out there, it goes in a lot of decks, it helps break the Wormstone. It's a permanent +1/+1, so I think that adds value to it, where if it was just a temporary +1/+1, it would not be good enough. But that coupled with Scout makes this quite relevant and allows things to twist an additional time. So be on the lookout for Sharpen Reflex. That's the other thing. Them having twist units might mean that they're more inclined to do it for minimal value because they're going to get value on the back end of it. So a lot of times to play around Sharpen Reflex, you just don't do anything and have them just play it for the Scout and the +1/+1. All right, next up we have Char. So Char is in here, even though it is not a pump spell. I do consider a combat trick because it plays well with quick draw as well as just upgrading on power. Or waiting for twists. And that's why I say you should play around it. More so because it's just so small and insequential. It's easier to play around than it is something like Streets of Flames or Gun Down. So Char deals 2 damage to an enemy for 1 in a red. The reason why I say this is, once again, Vorlunk into Vorlunk. Typically, they just bounce off each other, right? Or you'd block. But if they have Char, then all of a sudden they can hit your guy, and then their Vorlunk will kill yours for 1 power. So this one is a little bit tougher to play around just because of the fact that, 2 power does do a lot more. Like it's what are you gonna do? Not blink or not twist your Blurry Chaser? But it is important to keep it in consideration because it negates the 2 red spells as well in the form of Daring Maneuver, which we'll talk about in a second, and Pummel. So if you feel like Pummel or Daring Maneuver will get you there, Char is a way to answer those things by either dealing the 2 damage to negate the 2 health or killing the card in response to your pump. So you need to really be cognizant of Char, and honestly, the fact that it's so specific and just can hit so many different things, you just have to take the 2 damage into consideration. Obviously, the easiest way to do that is just to block with an abundance of health. So once again, using our recruit for a 2/2, but there you go again. You go back into that Vorlunk where it's a 3/4. Your 2/5 should be fine blocking it, but Char will still kill your guy. So that's one of the things that makes Char really efficient. Of note, it combos really well with Overwhelm as well. So, the 2 damage they deal to the unit pre-combat or pre-damage means that that's 2 more damage that's going to roll over from your opponent. That works with stuff like... I'm sorry, guys. I really do apologize for that. So, I have Char on here, even though it's a combat trick. I do think it is narrow or so easy to play in so many different scenarios. That is something to consider, and sometimes you just can't play around it, and if they have it, they have it. But yeah, once again, you can identify with end of turn stomp or stops or pauses, which I'm not gonna get into too much because I feel like I've said that over, and I have no idea how long this episode's gone. But we're almost there, guys. We're almost there. We have 3 more to go. These are the most frequent. This and Char, you see that at 55%. So yeah, you're gonna start to see these, which is to no surprise to anyone. Kasendrith values Chars quite highly, as do most streamers, so no surprise there. Helps fight early aggression. Aggro decks want it, and defensive or slow decks want it. Next up is Daring Maneuver. This is my favorite combat trick, honestly. I feel like because of the fact that it's so flexible. I won't go into too much depth on it because literally Farming Eternal just had a discussion about this, I think 2 episodes ago, discussing Daring Maneuver over Pummel, or maybe it would have been the last one. But for 2 and a red, give a unit +2/+2 and Overwhelm this turn. This card is great because you can play it on defense, giving the +2/+2, and is great on offense because it's once again the +2/+2 like Pummel, but the Overwhelm allows you to get damage over. And so this one, play around it the same way you would Pummel, except just understand that it is an option on defense. The Overwhelm isn't relevant on defense, so you're really just looking at the +2/+2. That being said, it is 2 power, so a little bit. If you see a stop, if you don't see a stop at 1, but you see a stop at 2, then that should identify that it's not a Char and it is a Daring Maneuver. But yeah, I kind of feel like we've gone over everything as far as this one is concerned. So I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but once again, you see that this one has a 0.56 frequency in top winning decks. All right, home stretch, guys. We have High Alert. This is one of the highest ones. This one you see 0.57, all right, which technically I guess is going to be the highest, most used combat trick. I have 2 more that I want to mention that are more removal, but so combat trick wise, High Alert is the most frequent at 0.57. The other thing about this one is that it has Warp, which actually is a benefit and a drawback to it. So for 4 and a Justice, you ready one of your units, and it gets a +3/+3 and Endurance this turn. So the Endurance isn't really that important because at the end of the day, on defense, you're more worried about the +3/+3. Yeah, they'll have the blocker back, but of note, it's gonna lack the +3/+3. So this one is a little easier to pick up on because you just have to do math. Did they do nothing on their turn 4 and they're attacking with suboptimal attacks or non-profitable attacks? Are they do the 4 power, and then is +3/+3 exactly what makes the difference here? So it's fairly easy to identify high alert. I think the high cost of it plus the high power adjustment or a stat boost is very easy to pick up on. The one thing I will say is the warp gives it a benefit because they are essentially drawing a card by playing it, but it is also a downside where people are highly incentivized to use it that turn instead of just drawing it. So you really put a tax on their turn. 4 power is typically your entire turn. So to play around this, you want to look at the tempo aspect of it. If they are attacking with it, right, then you can see like, hey, do I want to take up their entire turn for them to eat up my 3/3? Yeah, that's fine with me. I have a lot better 4s and 5s coming, so I'd rather put them behind a turn. Cool, you can do that. The benefit to the drawback to that being warp is, like I said, people want to play it. So a lot of times if they're attacking their 3/3 into your 3/3 and you have them on high alert, heck, just take the 6 damage. Because they're taking their whole turn to deal 3 damage to you, and then you can crack back if you wanted to, you know what I mean? Or just continue to develop your board. The flip side to that is that, yeah, it's just literally that. They want to warp it off the top of their deck. If they have it in their hand, they're less inclined, you know what I mean? But then it wouldn't have mattered anyways. So they're either going to play it or continue to develop their board and play their 4 drop. So yeah, I really do feel like it is quite easy. Just like Entrapment, if you guys remember that card from the last set or from the last format, 4 power tricks are very easy to pick up on. And so you can play around high alert quite well. There are going to be times where you can't, but that's the other thing too. Like, how very rarely are decks not going to have anything to do on 4 power and 5, especially 5. So if they pass the turn with 5 power up or 4 power up, or maybe they attacked, you just took it and they did nothing. Well, guess what? Put them on high alert. And you either have something to deal with the +3/+3, or you just don't attack, and then they are forced to, all right, how bad do you really want to warp this thing? Of note, I didn't put this in here because it is a rare, but it kind of fills a similar slot. So I will mention Withstand. That is the rare pump spell for 5 Justice. It gives a +4/+4 and Endurance. So that one plays a very similar role where it can eat a unit because it's so much stats. So that one is extremely easy to play around because it's just unfavorable attacks, and would +4/+4 be a blowout here? Did they do nothing on their turn 5 and just pass the turn and their justice? Do they have double justice influence? So be on the lookout for those. But all right, guys, that is going to do it. I hope that helped. I hope you got a little bit of insight into that. It helps you get some win percentages. 2 cards that I want to mention that are not combat tricks, but they can influence. First off is Zuberi's Longbow. This is the +1 or +2/+1 weapon. So it's going to be on the board. It's not a fast spell. It doesn't have flash or anything like that, or ambush. It's not going to come into play without you expecting it. It's going to be on the board, but it breaks at fast speed if there's a scout. So i.e. things like Sharpened Reflex or Streets of Flames will cause this to trigger break, dealing 3 damage at fast speed. So I do consider it a bit of a combat trick. The shift, like hitting it off of Blurry Chaser, is not going to be that. But once again, the fact that there's right off the bat just 2 commons that fast spells that will trigger Scout and cause this to break is something you need to take into consideration when doing combat math when a Zuberi's Longbow is on the board. All right, just wanted to mention that. The next one is a Mob Rule. So Mob Rule is a removal spell, but it is a conditional removal spell that is a fast speed. So I want you to take that into consideration when you're using your pump spells. If you have them on Mob Rule, once again, easy math, just look at the unit that you would most likely want to kill on your side of the board, count up their units and see if it's relevant to play around. And you want to look at things like, are they going to trade where Mob Rule no longer kills your unit? So maybe they might kill something, they block the smaller things and then they kill the big thing before damage is dealt. Things like that. To play around this, you just do math. Like, My biggest thing is a 4/4. They have 3 units on the board. I am safe. I don't have to worry about mob rule. Okay, my biggest thing is a 4/4, and they have exactly 4 units, and I have them on mob rule. Well, do I have the pump spell? Do I have the removal spell that I can use do I have charge to kill one of their smaller units in response to mob rule? Do I have the pummel or the high alert to make my unit bigger than they think mob rule will be to kill it? But I do want to mention it because it is something like that does play around. It works same thing on the offense. You attack, you're 3/3 and they're there 3/3, and then you use a combat trick and they're like, haha, mob rule to kill your guy. So things like that all come into play. It's worth playing around and considering. All right. Last couple of things I want to mention is Granite Coin. Deals 1 damage. Typically this one, same thing. If they have some kind of weird attack or something, just take a second to think, like, would 1 extra damage make the difference? And if it would, then you might want to consider playing around coin and blocking an abundance. Or if it's a small unit, like it's a 2/2 into your 3/3 and you have a high enough life total, just take the 2 damage, especially early game where playing the coin for value is beneficial, extremely beneficial, because they're taking out something that matters. Regardless, they're going to probably have to play it that turn. So you might as well just make them go to face with it. So if you don't have any blocks that will benefit or that could be a blowout from 1 extra damage, then just play around Granite Coin. And if they don't have it, they don't have it. And it costs you very little, but you get to keep your unit. And lastly, Retribution and Eviscerate. The only reasons why I mention these is because they both have onslaught triggers. So you want to take that into consideration. If you have them on Retribution, they attack with something that is clearly going to die to your board, then you might want to put them on Retribution and block the unit anyways, because with whatever you would assume they're going to cast Retribution on. So they attack their 2/1 into your 5/5, right? Well, you're like, well, I don't want to lose it to a high alert, right? But let's say they have exactly 3 power or something like that. Well, then just go ahead and block, because the chances are they're going to have the Retribution. You're going to lose your guy anyway, so you might as well have it be a 2-for-1 for them. Same thing with Eviscerate, things like that. Just something to consider as well. Maybe they're really trying to just get that extra 5 mil cards. That could be relevant, so they're trying to get that extra value. So block accordingly, or leave up something that could prevent things. For example, a little snippet trick that I used in my most recent deck that had Primal, I actually played 1 Swift Refusal, and it worked out well. You guys can catch it. I will post a bit on YouTube. The VOD might still be on the stream, where I literally played Swift Refusal just for Eviscerate. I'm not sure if it works off of the Curse from Accuser or not, but I considered that, and Retribution. And then of course it hits Flame Strike or whatever, that red spell, so I wasn't going to die to that. And 3 times over the course of the draft it did exactly that. One time it didn't, because I tapped out a little. I was like, oh, I had a unit that would have left 1 power open. I had the Swift Refusal, and I just went with the other line tapping completely out. And then I was like, oh, I guess I'll just leave Swift Refusal open next turn for the Retribution. Sure enough, they had the Retribution. But it did counter a Retribution and an Eviscerate, both of which were completely backbreaking and won me the game. So that is something to consider. I think Swift Refusal, don't get me wrong, I don't think it is the best kept secret in this format, but I do feel like there is some value to be had, especially in a color faction that isn't very deep. But yeah, that's everything, guys. I feel like this is going to be a bit of a long one. Definitely feel like it's going to be over an hour with our pseudo 2 topics and whatnot. But let me know in the comments below. It's extremely important. This one I kind of feel like is beneficial, but a little out there as well. So let me know if this is a little too in-depth, a little too specific, or things that you already knew. I hope this helped you get a little bit better about this format. I know it has helped me, so I no longer get blown out by high alerts and things like that. But let me know in the comments below, or come on live on Twitch. I stream every Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday at twitch.tv/Jedi_EJ. And let me know what you think about this episode and what combat tricks you've played around, which ones you haven't, what kind of blowouts you've done, and what kind of blowouts you've received or been a part of because of combat tricks in the Dark Frontier format. Once again, you guys can follow me on Twitter or subscribe to this channel on EJthePodcast. That's where the Twitter I post, like I said earlier. So I'm not going to reiterate, just keep up to date on what's going on with me. And the YouTube channel is where you catch all my content, everything constructed, limited, brews, up to date, or patch notes and updates on EJ the podcast. And then if you guys are interested in following me on my Reels life journey, which is through circus and fire performing and fitness and cosplay and all that great stuff, because I'm a jack of all trades, like a druid, like I was on WoW, you can follow me at Caesar LaBare. That's LABARE, the number 7 on Instagram. But all right, guys, that is good to do it. Once again, thank you once again to all our shout outs today. You guys are great. I really appreciate all the supporters. You guys are awesome. And thank you for all those guys that upticked my Reddit posts. I really appreciate that. I might start posting a little more on there, and following on YouTube. We're slowly getting there. So thank you guys so much. And until next time, happy gaming.